welcome so wholeheartedly. Welcome, Terry. I'm so excited to have her join us this week. Terry has the most incredible story. And what I love about Terry at this point coming onto the show is that, my kitchen, is that Terry is exactly the example that I'm wanting all of you to understand, that like, it doesn't matter where you are in your life, the courage to do something to change what you need to change when you're not happy with it, and go and find, live your dream, go and experience the adventure that you want to have. And this evening is about really listening to a wonderful, authentic adventure. Terry went traveling for, I think, a full year, but she'll give you details. And just to get inspired about, like, we all have a story. So thank you so much, Terry, for joining. And I'm so excited to hear about the adventures. Just the clip on the WhatsApp that she gave me was so thrilling. So welcome to my kitchen.
Thank you, Elaine. And thank you, everyone, for coming to listen to me. Elaine, do you mind if I spotlight myself?
Go for it. I'm not sure what that means, but I think that's fine.
Means I just take over the whole screen.
You can take over. I look at the gallery so that I keep an eye on everybody, but they can definitely all see you. So yeah, you can spotlight yourself. Sure.
Are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? Mary Oliver. I was 50 years old, single with a 9-year-old daughter, owned my own house in Komiki, had an amazing corporate job. My life was good. Yet I was yearning for something more. That same old was boring me. I wanted new challenges, new adventures. I wanted to learn new things. I just yearned to do a around-the-world travel. I mean, haven't you all dreamt of traveling around the world, just chucking it all in and heading out? And during lockdown, have you been thinking of like wide open horizons or exotic locations? I'd had this burning desire for so many years, but why didn't I do it? I think I got caught in the trap of accumulation, new car, new house, designer clothes, latest cell phone, and spent so many years and so much energy working my way up the corporate ladder. I mean, most of us turn 50 and are actually quite relieved we're still alive. I looked around at my friends. Some of them hadn't made 50. Some of them were getting divorced. Some of them had horrible diseases. Some of them had settled for second best. My life wasn't bad. In fact, my life was good, but I wanted more than what I had, or I wanted something different. And one day I was sitting on my brown leather lounge suite, and I thought to myself, if I sat on this leather lounge suite every single day for a whole year, would I get the same satisfaction? Or if I sold it, would I get more satisfaction from waking up on the Galapagos Islands? And I looked at myself in the mirror and I asked, could I be a 50-year-old woman who owned nothing? Could I give up the safety and security of my job and my house and head out into the unknown with no guarantees and no idea how long it would last or what I could do when I came back? I decided I was that woman who wouldn't be tied down by my possessions and the weight of other people's expectations. I decided I would make extraordinary changes in my own life to make my dreams come true. But how was I going to travel around the world? I didn't have a rich daddy. Somehow I'd never actually won the lotto. I didn't have any savings. But I had learned to not argue for my limitations. And so I did what any rational 50-year-old would do. I sold everything I possessed. I resigned from my corporate job. I took my daughter out of school. I sold the house we were living in, the clothes off our back. My mother was absolutely horrified. My financial advisor threw up his hands and told me I was fiscally irresponsible. I mean, I can even hear some of you in the room thinking, hell, she's brave, but she must be crazy. Who takes a gap year at 50? What single mother drags her daughter around the world? Why spend 20 years accumulating stuff to sell it all for a 1-year adventure? But once that decision was made, and the more I sold, gave away, threw away, donated, the more alive I felt, the lighter I felt. And so the day arrived. Indigo and I embarked on an epic 366-day around-the-world trip. It was absolutely life-changing. And I look at Indigo. She's so at home in the world. She's so adaptable. She's so open to change. She'll talk to anyone, any color, any culture, any language, any race. She's just so flexible. And I have never regretted, not even for 1 second, that decision. In fact, in a heartbeat, I would turn back the clock and just do it all again. So I'm inviting you to join me. I'm going to take you on our journey of discovery around the world. So this is our trip. I'm just going to get the laser pointer going here. We started from Cape Town to Johannesburg, flew across to Florida. We started at Disney, which was the 9-year-old's dream. Spent an amazing 3 weeks in New York City, took the train to Toronto, took 5 days to drive across to Thunder Bay, met friends in Seattle, spent a great time in San Francisco, and then dropped down to the unknown. We started our travels in America. It was English, it was familiar. Then we headed down to South America for 5 months where we didn't know a soul or couldn't speak the language. We went to the Galapagos Islands for 3 weeks. We did a deep Amazon, spent a lot of time in Peru. The favorite part of my trip was Easter Island, the most isolated inhabited place in the world. Tiny bit of time in Chile, Argentina, right from the jungles down to the ice fields. And then we did the worst flight I've ever done in my life, 36 hours, Buenos Aires to Doha to Bangkok. We spent 5 months doing Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So these were the 38 places we stayed. We did very, very slow travel. It averages out to about 9.5 days a place. We didn't have a fixed agenda. The biggest blessing we did was to stay with locals. We never stayed in backpacks or hotels, except one night when our flight was delayed and when Indigo turned 10, we were in Penang Island, she chose to stay at the Hard Rock Hotel. But one of the biggest blessings of staying with locals was A, it was so much cheaper, but B, you really got involved in the local culture. We would sit and cook dinner with them and sit around the table with them and their friends and chat. And it amazed me. Our conversations were all the same. We were all worried about our futures in an increasingly unstable economic environment. And that was before COVID. We were all concerned about corruption in the government, and we all wanted the best for our kids. I had to do a lot of research before we left because we were flying on a South African passport, the famous Green Mamba. These were the 38 flights we took that year. We had a round-the-world ticket, which gave us 8 stops as long as we continued in the same place. But I had to work out where was safe for 2 women to travel, where could we get visas, and of course, what were the dream destinations. This was Indigo's post on Facebook just after we got back, which taught her about budgeting. But she got 50 Rand pocket money a week, and I can promise you it was spent on sweets in every single country we were in. She learned a lot about exchange rates, and of course, when we were in Vietnam, she got 108,865 dong and felt like she was the richest person in the world. I had a very simple way of budgeting. I left my money in South Africa, and every month brought 1/12 across into US dollars, divided it by the number of days in that month, and that was how much we had to spend in a day for accommodation, travel, food. If we needed to save up for something special that was expensive, we'd just do walking days. We would walk for hours, getting lost, getting found, getting back, but we'd just keep walking. So one of our biggest lessons was how to travel light. This was our luggage 2 months into the trip, and exactly the same luggage on our way to Asia. My backpack for the entire year weighed 12 kilograms and Indigo's weighed 8. We had a rule. If you bought it, you had to carry it. So Indigo learned very quickly that all those things are not so desirable when you're dragging them around the world. We did no formal schooling that year at all, but we swapped the classroom for the world. We absolutely learned so much, and living with locals added that whole extra dimension of seeing and feeling and interacting with people going around their normal lives. We did courses everywhere we went, courses that we probably would never do. Like we did a jewelry making course in Penang Island. We picked up the shell, we carved it, we sanded it, we made all these tiny little things. But the point of doing something is you can be a tourist and go to a place and take a photograph and leave. But if you spend 4 or 6 hours doing a course with someone, you start to know them and feel them and get all this extra knowledge. And we made so many friends by doing courses everywhere. We had the most delicious day in Cusco on a chocolate making course, roasting and grinding and tempering, and the smells and the sweetness. Such an amazing day. But what's really interesting is they have a drink that they make out of guinea pig milk. Now, can you just imagine the experience of milking a little guinea pig to get a thimble full of milk? Every single country we went to, almost every single city we went to, we did a cooking course. And the reason we did that is you go around the markets with a guide and you learn so much because you can talk to the market, to the sellers and the buyers. I didn't know you got 18 different kinds of garlic, and each one has got a specific use. When we walked around the market by ourselves, we had no idea what we were looking at. But the markets weren't always great. And I came from a place of shopping at Woolworths, air-conditioned Woolworths, where everything was packaged in plastic. And at first, these things were horrific to me. The smell, the flies, the blood, the things they ate. But the longer we traveled and the more we spoke to the locals and the more we went on cooking courses and knew what was happening, you start to have so much empathy and understanding, and you see the world through new eyes. I discovered that almost nobody around the world has a refrigerator. And so the stuff in the market is actually slaughtered, sold, cooked, and eaten that day. And while we started to develop a lot of empathy, there was still no ways I was going to have earthworms for supper or some animal's lips. Another thing we learned by going to the markets is actually you start to learn where your food comes from. If I shop at Woolworths and buy a chicken drumstick and roast it, it's very different from this cooking course we did in Malaysia, where you had to actually choose the chicken you wanted to eat that night. And Indigo was horrified and in tears, but such a lesson to see the source of your food. And you often landed up, or I often landed up, because Indigo wouldn't, but eating stuff that at home I would never have touched. And once you get over your Western squeamishness, you discover it's actually quite delicious. we had such fun doing the cooking courses. When we were in Vietnam, we went down the Viet Cong River in a boat, and we stopped at all these, which just looked like shacks to me, but we bought garlic at one and rice at one and this ingredient. It was a fascinating day. And we stopped at this little shack to make rice paper. And while I'll never make it at home, and everything was kind of MacGyvered together, but that experience lives on for a long time. It was such a fun day. But another thing I learned from doing the cooking courses, when we started out on the trip, Indigo was 9 years old. She didn't want to taste any local food. It looked and smelled so alien. She just wanted hamburgers or pizzas. And I didn't want to be in South America eating a hamburger or a pizza. But I found that if she went to the market and we bought the stuff and we spent the afternoon cooking with hosts, she would eat it. And then she would start to order that food the next time we went out. So that was such a great way of getting her to get used to the local food. But we went to every single art museum, science museum, natural history museum, everywhere we went. And that was our learning. And the amazing thing is that no longer are these museums those dusty glass cabinets where you must keep your hands behind your back. Everywhere is interactive. This amazing Picasso exhibition, when you walk in, they give you a piece of paper, crayons and paint and cookies, and encourage you to sit down and to be creative and to draw what you see. The science museums around the world were really hands-on, and I absolutely believe that Indigo learned so much by doing and trying and experimenting than she ever would if she had spent that year in school learning out of a book. When we got to South America, we were going to spend 5 months there, so we decided we better learn Spanish. I landed up going to the kids' Spanish school, thank goodness. This was our Spanish teacher, absolutely delightful. We would spend the morning doing all the formal learning, the counting, the tenses, and all sorts of stuff. But we would have the most beautiful afternoons with her. The decision was we would go out to the markets, to the museums, to the botanical gardens, but she would speak only Spanish. And we had so much fun discovering the city and really getting immersed in Spanish. To be truthful, I didn't pick up that much Spanish. Indigo learned it much quicker than me. And sometimes to the hotel or the taxi driver or the market, I would just say to them, don't speak to me, speak to the child. Indigo learned to do all sorts of things. She learned to snorkel in the Galapagos Islands. And sometimes I'm envious and I think, what an amazing way to learn to snorkel looking for blue-footed boobies than it is to do it in a chlorinated pool in Wynberg suburb, for instance. But not all experiences were great. When we're in Vietnam, they have this snake wine everywhere you go. And I always saw the locals drinking it and was persuaded one day to try it. It didn't taste that bad, but that absolute disgusting feeling of getting a snake skin scale off your tongue, not to be repeated. When we were in in Thailand, we saw them doing Chinese cupping everywhere, and Indigo wanted to try it. It was excruciatingly painful, and I think she regretted it. But these are all just learning points and experiencing things in the world that you wouldn't do if we'd stayed in Komiki for the year. We also always had taken the decision to stay with locals, but to stay outside the city centers. So on Easter Island, which is tiny, we stayed about 2 kilometers on a farm, which turned out to be such fun. And the owner taught Indigo how to drive a four-wheeler with gears. Oops. I don't know why that won't play. Anyway. One thing about travel is that you learn tolerance. We saw so many different religious ceremonies around the world, And you start to see that there isn't just one God for everyone, that everyone has their own special way of expressing their spirituality. New York City was just like it was in the movies. We spent 3 weeks in Brooklyn, and we walked and walked and walked. This is the High Line, a converted railway line that's turned into gardens and artwork. Absolutely fascinating. Of course, Central Park, you have to rollerblade and be just like a local. We went to the opera in the park. We went to the Bodies exhibition, which was an eye-opener for me. I actually seen real human bodies, the organs and the veins. It was a big learning point. I'd never really understood my own body before that. But one of the things we did was called Dialogues in the Dark, where you go into this pitch dark room as if you were blind, and you're given a stick and you're told to walk down the steps, catch the underground, get out at Central Park, go to the shop and buy a yogurt, and then get into the restaurant and have a cup of tea. For me, it was absolutely terrifying. It was so dark you couldn't see a thing. And you have so much empathy and understanding, a new way of seeing once you've been through an experience like that. What was interesting to me, it wasn't just the museums that were learning points. Indigo was absolutely fascinated by the laundromat. Normally what we would do is, because I was traveling with a child, we didn't go out at night. So we would spend the entire day being busy, and then come back at night, and I would research for the next day, and we would do our washing in the shower. But in New York, we went to the laundromat once a week, because for Indigo, it was something new and different. And she just loved getting the change and getting the soap and doing the washing. So you can learn, and it doesn't have to be these big intellectual scientific things. Another learning point was we traveled from Toronto to Thunder Bay by car. South Africa, you don't put in your own petrol. This is a skill Indigo has now, and she absolutely adored it. So our philosophy on spending our money on adventures, not on things, or on experiences, really worked out well. We hired this little water plane, and we flew for miles in Canada and landed on a deserted beach somewhere, and Indigo pretended she was a stowaway or a survivor. But it's that kind of thing that you could go perhaps in Toronto and walk around and take photographs, or you can go on these little mini adventures, and all of these things just add up to such a rich experience. We spent 3 weeks on the Galapagos Islands. What an absolutely fascinating place. The water is such a milky blue color. The animals, the iguanas, there is not one iguana. There are not 10, there are not 100. There are just thousands of millions of iguanas, and they sit on top of each other and they swim in the water. And the first day I was swimming in the sea, and this 2-meter long iguana swam past me. I nearly had a heart attack. But we didn't come on a cruise ship and come in onto the land for like a couple of hours. We rented someone's back room, and we walked and cycled around this island that was absolutely so beautiful. And interesting, we could feel when a cruise ship landed and 200 or 300 people would descend on the island, and they'd all go to the same restaurant and to the same spot, and they'd all demand bottled water and lobster and hamburgers. And when they left to go back onto the ship, you could feel the whole island just breathe a sigh of relief. And while they needed tourism to survive, they also found the tourists very overbearing and demanding. This was the view from our room, and it fascinated me, these kids. The minute they came back from school, this was their playground. They played on top of the roof. All these electric wires were live. There were no banisters. And they were absolutely free-range kids, so different from our helicopter parenting and keeping our kids safe all the time. The reason most people come to the Galapagos is for its natural beauty and its diversity, but it's to see these giant tortoises. And they are giant. But what really saddened me is that there is not a single tortoise born in the wild in the Galapagos anymore. And why is that? So the rats swim in from the tourist ships that are parked about 2Ks, 3Ks out to sea because the harbors are very shallow. The rats swim in and they eat all the tortoise eggs. And it's such a fine balance when you're traveling as a conscious traveler, because you go to see the tortoises, but your very presence there is what is making the tortoises extinct. And so now when it's breeding season, there's a race between the locals and the rats, because the locals try and collect all the eggs to put them in incubators so that when they're big enough, they can put them back on all the different islands. So sad that they depend on tourists, but tourists are what is destroying their very assets. This was us doing a deep Amazon. I'm very glad I've been to the Amazon. It's probably not on my bucket list anymore. That heat in that jungle is absolutely ferocious. As an African coming from the savannah to go into this jungle that is so thick and so closed and so full of stuff, it was terrifying. You honestly could not see more than a meter in front of you. It was absolutely dense, and everything is poisonous and deadly and dangerous. Indigo had a great deal of fun. We stayed in a place with no electricity and no comms, and I wondered, goodness, if anything happened, there is no ways we would have been able to make our way out the jungle by ourselves. After doing these walks in the jungle, which were just excruciating, so hot, we asked the guide if he could just take us on the boat every day. And Indigo, she had a single mom who never did fishing. She was absolutely delighted to fish. And the highlight was when her and the guide caught a piranha one afternoon, all teeth and no body. And the things you see, when we were going back down the Amazon, an airplane on a boat came past. I mean, who would think? Because we didn't want to do the tours, because you could never see the animals. They were probably half a meter away. The guide took us to his family compound one day, and they make these hats out of leaves. Obviously, this one wasn't made by us, because ours were very untidy, but one of those kind of days that stays in your memory, because even though we couldn't talk to them, we still had some fun and some way of communicating with that family. We stayed in Aguas Caliente, which is at the bottom of Machu Picchu, for about 10 days. And this allowed us to go up 3 times, once in the morning, once in the sunset, and once in midday. And we had this really interesting encounter. There was a group of around 30 Peruvian Indians who had never ever seen a white child. They'd read about them and they'd probably met adults. They were completely fascinated by Indigo. And the school teacher asked us if they could take a photograph with Indigo, and I presumed the whole class and her. So the boys wanted to do it 1-on-1 and the girls 2-by-2. It took us a whole hour. But what a fun, interesting thing we experienced, reaching out to kids of possibly the same age, and both sides fascinated by each other. Machu Picchu was interesting for me. It's so fragile and so isolated. And I sat on one of these grass banks one afternoon, and the local guide came to sit next to me because his group had gone off to explore. And he explained to me about accumulative damage. That Machu Picchu used to have about 6,000 visitors a day. When we were there, they'd reduced it to 2,500, and currently it's about 650, but that's because of COVID. But every time a single person stands on a blade of grass, or kicks a pebble off the path, or touches the wall, these are tiny, minute bits of damage, but you times that by 6,000, by 366 days, and you start to see the impact of visitors on such a fragile site. And that is one thing, the more we traveled, the more we actually learned how fragile the earth is and how careful you have to be as a traveler. Some of my favorite things were the non-touristy things. When we were in Cusco, we stayed in a room in an orphanage. And these ladies came at the end of the day to come and collect their pay, but just their bright colors and their beautiful faces. I was endlessly fascinated by the locals because they're so different from our locals and from what we see every day in our lives. The colors in Peru are just outstanding. Everything is bright and over the top. And the one day we were staying in Olio Tambo, and we went for a walk in the afternoon, and this beautifully dressed old lady with her llama with earrings and a necklace was walking home, and we managed to chat to her and get a photograph. But it's those kind of tiny moments that absolutely fill you with so much pleasure when you travel. We went searching for the condor, which we saw eventually, a magnificent bird. But actually, Indigo was much more interested in this little boy and his pet llama. And things went very well until the llama decided to spit at her. And then things went downhill very fast after that. We had to balance caution with adventure, safety with risk. When we were in Lima, we did a paraglide off the cliffs of Lima. And that was fine. Indigo was so up for the adventure. The issue came is that we couldn't both fly at the same time. So Indigo flew first and I could watch her and it was amazing. And then I had to leave her on the ground when I flew. A 9-year-old child, didn't know a soul in the city, couldn't speak the language. And sometimes you have to take a calculated risk. I built quite a lot of safety procedures into where we were. Indigo always had the business card of the family we were staying with and a letter that they had written. They always had my sister and my friend Adele's contact numbers in case something went wrong. But at the same time, you couldn't be so cautious that you didn't actually experience anything. And of course, we did all the child-related activities as well. My absolute favorite place in the entire world is Easter Island. That's the island where these giant moai, these heads are carved out of rock and they surround the island. The heads are all 1/3 of the body and they've got these long ears. And they were built thousands of years ago. And then Easter Island had an ecological disaster. It's a volcanic island with no source of fresh water. And they chopped down the last tree, which meant they couldn't fish and go out and trade. And all these moai here had actually been carved, and it took them months and months and months to carve them. And they hadn't even carried them down to their resting place because they all stand at the sea. It was the start of the bad times when the families fought against each other and there was cannibalism. But there's so much mystique on this island and so many stories and so much mystery. The moai were actually carved directly out of the mountain, out of the volcanic rock, and then they were taken down about 8 kilometers to the sea. And of course, that's the biggest argument of all. Some of these things weigh 14 tons. How did they get them down the mountain? I actually found them quite overwhelming. Some of them are 3 stories high and they're brooding and they stand with their back to the sea and they stare like sightlessly inland. But during the bad times, the families would go and push each other's moai over because that represented their ancestors. So everywhere you go on the island, there are these beautifully carved things just lying on the ground. This is how you normally see the moai. They stand with their backs to the sea. This particular guy here is, oh no, sorry, this one is 3 stories high. He's absolutely massive. This one in the front here is not facing the sea. It's called the traveling moai. Because in the 1960s, a huge tsunami swept over the island and knocked every single statue over. And the Japanese government came as a project with huge cranes, and they lifted them up again. But they took this guy home with them. And there were quite a lot of petitions and international incidences, and he eventually came home. Sad to say, there is still one of them in a museum in the UK. These are the Gazu Falls, called Devil's Throat. I've been to Niagara Falls and to Vic Falls, which are kind of in a straight line, and this waterfall is in a circle. It's absolutely terrifying because you can't even see the bottom. It just all bubbles up, and the sound. But once again, it's in the middle of the jungle, and it was ferociously hot over there. So we escaped from the jungle right down to the south of Argentina. What an amazing experience to hike on a glacier. First thing I didn't realize was how blue the snow is. And the second thing is how dangerous it is, because these chasms just open up in front of you and they can be several meters deep. And the sound that it makes, it groans and it creaks, and such an experience that you can't even do in South Africa. But of course, my favorite experience was we went in a boat and I chipped off some ice off an iceberg. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, I had a whiskey with ice that was 800 or 900 years old. What a fantastic start to a day. Vietnam, I mean, we've seen the movies, we've read the books, we've heard the songs, but to actually go to the Gucci tunnels and see the effects of the war. Indigo, at 10 years old in this picture, could barely fit into these tunnels, where the adults, the men, the women, and children hid from the Americans. It's just so different seeing it in real life. Bucket list item. This is Geelong Bay, and we spent 5 days on a Chinese junk, just idly drifting between all those limestone mountains. Our cabin had a window from the top to the bottom, from ceiling to floor, and you could just sit there looking at these beautiful, beautiful scenes every single day. It was dreamy. It was like being in a dream. And of course, once again, the everyday things fascinated us. We persuaded our guide to let us stop and help these guys with their rice. And one thing that I never knew was when you're in the rice fields, the bottom is always wet and it is full of leeches. So when you come out of cutting the rice, you have to spend half an hour getting leeches off yourself. It put me off rice for life. Some days were very busy and other days were so peaceful. We went down the Tamcock River with this extraordinary scenery. But a thing I didn't know, and everybody in Vietnam rose with their feet. And if you start to think about it, it just makes so much more sense because your legs are so much stronger than your arms. And that's the thing of travel. If you travel with an open mind, you can come back and think, well, could we do it differently at home? The last country we visited was Cambodia. Another place that just sparks your curiosity. These amazing temples, there's so many of them and they're huge. And they were built for a purpose and then abandoned for hundreds of years. And what happened to make everyone leave? And honestly, these tree roots feel like they're alive. They feel like they're giant animals that have overtaken the temple. Such an amazing thing to do and to see, because if you hadn't been there yourself, you would kind of think it was a movie set. But this is real life, that people built this thing and then abandoned it for over 1,000 years. My last two pictures are my favorite pictures of the trip. This lady was a Buddhist monk, and while it might have been a bit touristy, we paid her and she gave us a blessing. But talking to her via our guide, I discovered we were the same age. She had also just turned 50. And it really, just the difference in our looks and our size, she was tiny, and our life experience was just actually mind-blowing that we could be the same age and just look so different. And this final picture was taken in Tanquil Island in Peru on Lake Titicaca. This guy was also 50. And on this island, the men do the knitting and the women work in the fields. And we'd walked up these hundreds of steps in this breathless air and sat next to him. And though we couldn't chat, there was still this feeling of warmth, and that we were all human and we could relate to each other. And it really is my favorite picture because it just epitomizes the difference and the learning and just so many different things on this earth that are available to us if we stay with an open mind. And so, where am I now? Actually, in truth, it didn't take that long to get back to where I was before I left. I've got a house in Kenilworth. My daughter was at a private school until lockdown. I am a professional speaker now. I'm an IT trainer. More and more, I'm doing Zoom hosting. Sorry. And what did my year of travel teach me? The first thing was around traveling light. And it wasn't just traveling light with luggage, but it was having a light footprint on the earth, being aware of how fragile it is, being aware of your impact as a tourist, and that fine balance between people needing your tourist money, but you are destroying the environment that you're visiting. But what it made me realize is how little stuff I need in my life to actually be happy. I also really learned the value of research and planning. Not that you need the research to go somewhere, but actually if you've got setbacks or if things go wrong, the more you know about the place, the more you are able, or the quicker you are able to flex and make a plan B. And about adaptability and flexibility and embracing change. Every time we went to a new place, it was new food and new people and new culture and a new way of speaking. But once we learned, instead of pushing back against that, to embrace that, it made such a difference in our lives. And I saw that you can travel as a tourist with a closed mind and just go somewhere, take the picture, demand to have your hamburgers and your bottled water. Or you can go with an open mind. You can go with a growth mindset. And we absolutely cultivated curiosity. Everywhere we went, we asked questions. We didn't just go to tourist places. In fact, quite often, we would skip the famous tourist places and just hang with our local family where we were staying. And I learned over and over and over again that experiences will bring you lasting happiness that things never will. If I look at that t-shirt I bought for Indigo at the equator, it didn't even make its way home from the trip. But if I think about that afternoon where we spent at the equator doing experiments, which way did the water go down the plug hole? Can you balance an egg on a nail? Did you know you weighed less at the equator? Those memories stay with you absolutely forever. I used to have so much fear of loss, but in the process of giving up everything, I released myself. I'd broken the bondage of fear and I've reaped enormous benefits. And if I could gift you something, I would gift you a year of travel and growth and learning. Use your fear. You'll be amazed at what you can do in your life. And in the words of Mary Oliver, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so, so much. I'd love us to open up the gallery because I'm sure there are going to be lots of people, I've just done it, that might want to ask some questions. Your photographs were absolutely beautiful. I mean, I've even got little Hannah and Lexi mesmerized. Hi, girls. Watching so intently. So you got us all captivated. There's nothing like a audio visual sort of experience as well. So I'm going to actually open up. Hi, Lex. I'm going to open up and just see who wants to maybe ask some questions. This is just the beginning of the night, so I love the questions opening up. So let me see. I'll have a look.
Oh, and Elaine, my daughter is here, Indigo, in case anyone's got questions directed to her.
Yes, so Indigo is here, which is amazing. And Adele is asking, Terry, did it take a long time to plan the trip, and did anything go wrong?
So I guess it took around 4 months. From the day I put my house on the market until we left was around 4 months, and I probably spent 2 or 3 hours a night just researching the trip. But it was much more, more like a dream thing, like, should we go here? Or it would be amazing to go there. I actually would say to you, quite honestly, nothing went wrong, which didn't mean we didn't have setbacks or change our plans, but it all was part of the adventure. When we were leaving Peru to go to Ecuador, or the other way around, Ecuador to Peru, our plane was cancelled for 2 days, but they put us up in a hotel, which was the nicest accommodation we had stayed in, so we actually loved it. We were planning to go to Mexico, but at the time there was one of those horrible drug wars and people were killing each other, and so we just skipped it. But you know, things didn't really go wrong because we just built it into our adventure. Thanks, Adele.
Adele has one more question. She asked Indigo this question. She said, you look like you had so much fun. What was your favorite place or country?
I can't really think of a country because they all have their own like good things about them, but probably my favorite place was Angus Calientes, which is the town underneath Machu Picchu. And we stayed in this most like amazing little hotel, actually called Adele's Place, which is quite funny. And it was, one side of the hotel was right on the train tracks, and the other side looked on this massive waterfall. And we were on the side of the waterfall. So every morning when you woke up and looked out the window, you just saw this gushing like water streaming down and like full of plants, and it was just such an amazing experience to wake up to that.
That sounds amazing. That was one of my favorite little towns as well. When I went to South America, I also went up Machu Picchu and stayed in that little town. And I remember when I left, I thought, oh, I wish I had stayed for a couple of days at least. So I can also highly, highly recommend that. And there's another question coming in from Joe. Indigo, how did you feel when your mom said, let's go travel for a year? Do you miss that life? And how do you adjust coming back?
I actually vividly remember when my mother told us that we were going to go on the trip. We were driving up Kaapstad, I'm pretty sure, and she told me, and I just burst into tears. I was so upset. I was going to lose all of my friends, and I was going to leave like my home, and I didn't know like what was going to come from it. And I was quite shocked first of all, but then I really got like used to the idea that we were going to leave, and then I became like really, really, really excited. And adjusting back, it honestly, I came back at quite a young age as well. I was 10 when we got back, so I was quite used to moving around and everything, and I came back to a town that I'd lived in for quite a lot of my life, and my best friend was there. So it was kind of just coming back home from a holiday.
Yeah, that's amazing. The adaptability also of just, you know, of being young. I think one's a lot more adaptable. Can I ask a person, how old are you now?
I'm 17 now.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm going to ask a question. I know somebody's just asked in the chat. You can have a look at it, Terry, as well. So I want to ask both of you, because it's individual and you're at different places in your life. So how have you, you know, there's adapting, but how have you integrated the gifts and the experiences from traveling for that length of time into your life, India now? Like, how is it showing up for you? And then Terry, differently for you as well. So India.
Indigo.
I'll go first, I guess. I think it's just given me a lot of skills where I'm used to change, and if my plans change or something, I just kind of like go with the flow. So I'm quite used to that, and also just communicating with people has helped me a lot, because obviously, like, when you're in different countries, like it's like the wavelengths are completely different, and the language, and you really need to learn how to communicate with people and get across your point. So that's really helped me, and I use that quite a lot in essays and just in general with meeting people and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, definitely when you're in countries where it isn't your home language, one learns that communication is beyond words as well,
Exactly.
right? It's
Exactly.
body language, there's just facial expressions in and of itself
For sure.
speak volumes. So that's fantastic. I mean, that's definitely a skill that one can take and use for the rest of your life. And for all of us, if we could cultivate that. So that's brilliant. Thank you. And Terry, for you, you're coming back and integrating. What was that first year like for you when you came back?
Well, in fact, our first year was completely different because I'd sold everything. I'd sold a house in Komiki, but I don't know if I'd put it in the speech, but I owned a derelict property in New Bethesda that had no running water, no kitchens, no doors inside the house, no bathrooms. So actually we landed up going to New Bethesda and spent 4 years living there, spent about 6 or 7 months fixing up the house. And when I say derelict, seriously, there were holes in the wall, and it had what they call a brak dak, where it's mud and straw. And every time you walked on this wooden floorboard, you get this little sprinkle of dust. So we worked absolutely like Trojans to fix up this house to make it livable. And then I opened, because I'd lost my fear and I'd loved doing all those cooking courses, I opened a restaurant, believe it or not, like the Woolworths Queen, and then a guest house, and then a gift shop. And we won, well, in a town, New Bethesda had 10 restaurants, and we won best restaurant for 4 years in a row.
Wow.
And then we won in the South African Sanlam competition. We came second in the bed and breakfast category in the whole country, this tiny little dusty thing. So we didn't come back to our normal life. I never went back to corporate. So we had another 4 years adventure, which is another whole story in New Bethesda. So it was very different coming back, but I think I came back a completely different person. I used to be very corporate and drove the BMW 3-to-5i and had the latest cell phone, and all of that has completely lost interest for me now. And I'm much more empathetic about how I see people. I'm much more into people than into things. I spend much more of my focus on connecting and networking and hooking up with people, and much less worried about how I look and what I drive and what I do. So it really changed my outlook on the world.
I'm sure it would. That's amazing. I mean, that New Bethesda story could be another conversation in my kitchen again. I mean, it just seems like, once you take a step like that, it opens up to seeing your life as an adventure. Each new experience is an opportunity to open up new things.
I guess it's a bit like public speaking. I was absolutely terrified. I would never have done this, but I've hooked up with Andre, who's down here in the picture somewhere, and he's trained me and mentored me and helped me. And that's another fear I've been getting over, that fear of standing up and exposing yourself to the world. So yeah, and whenever I feel the fear, I start to think, how can I overcome this? If I want to do something and I'm scared, I'm actually learning how to actually embrace it and make it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's the thing that struck me when you started talking or answering the questions, is that thing of when you go traveling and you have to kind of go brand new. You have, especially when you go to countries and you don't know anything about the countries, you can't particularly speak the language. You can't have preconceived ideas because they'll just fall short. So you step into bravery straight away. And that's quite an amazing thing to come back and then translate, you know, if we step into bravery in our life, you know, see it from a different perspective, or see it with sort of more tourist eyes, you know, with fresh eyes, without the preconceived notions of the old and stagnant.
Absolutely. I mean, we're often a tourist in our own city now. We catch that hop on, hop off bus, and we do the tourist stuff, and it just feels like we're taking ourselves back a couple of years on a trip.
Brilliant. I mean, I love that. And you're right. We can live like that here. There's no reason not to. Even though, you know, we have work and there's school to go to or studies to do, you can opt to do something new and different each week. It's just how you choose to do things, you know. So I anyone who wants to, I know people are putting in the chat, and I'm trying to sort of read and scan them, but please unmute yourself and just like shoot and ask away. That would be just so very nice. There's one in my memory that I remember somebody
Yes, Andre asking a question.
Okay, Andre, hi.
You know, I must say, Terry, I'm getting so proud of you, because every time I hear this presentation, you completely revamp it and it looks completely different. But for those people who asked about New Bethesda, for me, that is the story. Because I think we often, we so enveloped to a fear, and the story for me is not the trip. It's the coming back and recreating. And what she doesn't tell you is in 6 years, she owns a house in Kenilworth. It's worth several million rand cash. She's paid for it. She's got it all back. So for all of us that have lost things in COVID, or we're fearful of losing the stuff, I think Terry shares two things with me that I think are absolutely key. And the one is a feeling of abundance, that there's enough for us and for everybody else out there. But there's one other thing that she doesn't tell you, and that is that she works really, really hard at whatever she's doing. And I think with the abundance needs to come a part that's called action. And that's Terry. So yeah, Terry, you make me so proud. You really, I must tell you that the week before we graduated, I went and spoke to her and I said, I don't think you're going to graduate. Because what most of the speakers do, they do the same presentation, and she changed it every single week. So I still hadn't heard a graduation speech. And she came along with a completely brand new speech she's never given again. But this is a woman who's really lived her life. And every single time she gave a story, I said, that's it. That's the one you've got to give. And then she changed it again, over and over and over again. And she's still doing it too. She's driving me nuts. But yeah, Terry, you know, at the moment, I would really like to say, and there's quite a few of the speakers that have joined us tonight. I see there's a few of them around. I want to say that she's really doing well, and probably doing better than most of the other people in a completely difficult time, purely because she's doing this kind of event, whatever it takes, she's doing. So yeah, Terry, great. Elaine, I just want to say, what a great format, eh?
Thank you.
What a lovely thing. I was feeling a bit outnumbered, but I see two men at the end, right at the end of my gallery. But yeah, I just think it's a wonderful thing. I think community is an incredibly important thing in today's terms, especially post-COVID. So well done on this initiative.
Thank you, Andre. I'm so pleased that you joined. It's delight to have new faces each time, and I think this is important, just like you said, you know. And for me, the idea of us chatting in the kitchen, it's an easy place to chat. And everybody has a story. I mean, this is for me one of the most special stories I've heard, because there's a lot of specialists, and as much as it's amazing to hear specialists, so you'll expect and kind of, you know, might not know about the speciality they're speaking about. But to have an adventure story, I totally agree. And I mean, there is nothing like learning about life through traveling. So thank you, Andre, for all of that input. input as well. And you know, just to know that this is a platform for everybody and anybody to come and care at any time. You know, there's no formalities, which is really nice. So, and it mixed. Some evenings there are a couple more guys. So I'm pleased you have balanced the scale though. So who else wants to? There was a little question. Yes, Tracy wants to ask.
Thank you. I agree. It's a life story, and it's applicable to absolutely everybody. And I'm ready to now have a child and take her on holiday. But I wanted to ask you were saying about taking the red bus, and Andre's shown that you work really, really hard. So how do you now get your travel fix in while having gotten back to that point of working hard again? And how do you make sure you're still getting that and keeping connected to that interest?
So in truth, I spend a lot of time dreaming and planning and counting every island that I should go and visit. And we got this unexpected gift in lockdown because Indigo was at Cedar House, a physical school, and because of she's now on an online school purely. And it's just opened up so many possibilities now, because I sit here and I think, oh, there's Santa Helena Island. Could we spend a year there? And I'm going to turn 60 soon. And I think, well, if I did that for my 50th birthday, or what should I do for my 60th birthday? Like in an ashram in India for a year, or walking the Great Wall of China, or the possibilities are endless and delicious. And so I spend a lot of time when I can't sleep at night. I'm either big nerd learning about Zoom, or else I'm reading about exotic places that would be good to visit. And the interesting thing is, I would give it all up. I would sell my house and give it all up in a heartbeat again. I've actually learned that the value in my life is people, and it's not possessions. If you're renting a house or sharing with a friend, but you've got friends and you've got people that stimulate you and interest you, that is 100% all you need. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really community, and when we come together is how we heal. The minute we separate, anything that separates us creates pain. So there was a small, so Joe Marsh wanted to ask, and you vaguely answered it now, Terry, what's your next trip?
Well, I guess currently my trip is the path of being a professional speaker. I want to do this. I want to learn the skills. I want to practice. And so I guess my trip may not be, it's much more, I guess, of a mental trip now. Although we did go 2 weeks ago to see the wildflowers, and there's a Saturday morning coming up, and I don't have a Zoom scheduled. So yeah, but I don't actually physically have a trip planned at the moment, except in my head. And in fact, the other day I met somebody who actually works on the cruise ships, who goes to the Antarctic, and he is a storyteller, and that is his job. He goes on these boats around the world talking in the evenings, and that really lit little light bulbs in my head as well. I'm like, oh, I could do that soon.
Love that. I mean, I think that you know, when you have that curiosity and as a traveler, which you naturally are, it just invites so many opportunities and possibilities, you know, to get excited about. It can be endless then. So who else? Indigo, what are your dreams? Joe wants to ask. Indigo, what are your dreams?
I think Indigo has left. She's a typical teenager. She's gone back to her iPad and friends.
We'll have to get you back for more of the new Bethesda. I mean, you were there, you said, for how many years? 3 years? 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
So when did you come back from New Bethesda?
We came to Cape Town about 2 years ago, I think. And So Indigo didn't go to school while we were at New Bethesda either. I don't think I'm like a fantastic mom, but when she did go back to school, it seemed to have made no difference that she spent 4 years. She's getting 60s and 70s and 80s. But when we were living in New Bethesda, she worked in the restaurant with me, and she could do literally everything. She could meet guests. She used to work in the kitchen and make salads and desserts, and she could do the credit card machine. But one day I kind of looked and I thought, you know, she only spends time with adults. There are no kids her age. And for me, that was heartbreaking. I absolutely loved New Bethesda. I fitted in there. I was the center of the village. I loved it. I was chairperson of the Owl House Society. And things were really great. But, you know, it's hard being a teenager in a dusty little Karoo town with no bright lights, big city, boys. So, yeah, we came to Cape Town.
I have Winship in here.
Hi, Terry. Please do.
Welcome. So, hi. Sorry I was late. My battery was dead. I couldn't find the password.
No problem.
Anyway, Terry, I'm Terry as well. I loved your talk. And I have absolute obsession with New Bethesda. I've been there about 6 or 7 times.
Did you stay with us, perhaps?
I don't know. Which was your place?
The Ibis Lounge.
Oh, the Ibis Lounge.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I did stay there. But I've stayed in a lot of places, and I've seen the Ibis Lounge. But yeah, it's the most incredible place. And
yeah, I've got very beautiful stories of New Bethesda. Yeah,
so
amazing place.
It is. It's a place that is a fantasy. It's like a place that you always just think is the idyllic life, the pace of it, you know, that is how people are meant to walk. That's the speed you're meant to walk. That's the pace that life is meant to be lived at. It somehow just feels like balmy. Yeah.
It's interesting living in a small village. When we lived there, there were 78 people in the village, and it's quite different because in a city, you've got your plumber, the guy you play golf with, the person you train with. In a tiny village, it's all the same person. And feelings can run quite high, and things can, the water wars and the stories of this farmer and that farmer. I mean, the stories there are unbelievable.
I just went there in the 80s, and
oh, wow.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with it sort of ever since, and like a real. It's interesting, you know, because I would always fear even going to live there, which is like 800 kilometers away, let alone Easter Island, and it's something that you long for, do you know?
Yeah. The interesting thing going there for me was going as a single mother with a child and English, but you know, I did exactly what I do everywhere I go. I did so much for the community, and I became the center of everything. And I trained everyone in IT, every farmer and every local. And I started a school for the kids. And I used to give photography lessons. And when I left, even these farmers who had hardly ever spoken to me came to me to say, please don't leave, we need you here. And you've just got to give to be accepted into a village. But also, I'd actually owned property there for about 20 years. I bought it in 1999. And on Saturday nights, you all go to the local club, and the farmers' wives bring all the food. And this one old guy, he always called me newcomer. And I said, but I've been here for 20 years. He says, you will always be a newcomer. And so it's that kind of, yeah, but it was amazing living there. But definitely the politics of small villages is something you have to navigate quite carefully. Very different from a city, because you're very anonymous here. You can be who you want to be. You know, if you walk
place there.
No, sadly, I had to sell it to come to Cape Town. But you know, it's the thing of, like you say, the slow pace of life. I was probably 2 blocks away from the post office, but it would take me an hour to get there, an hour to get back, because everyone stops to chat, and then you just get involved in something, and then you go and fix something for someone, and 2 hours later you just popped out for 5 minutes. You know, very different from city life. Yeah, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place in the world, that.
Yeah, it's a nice connection. I was so surprised after your whole world thing that you said, I knew the best. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Oh.
Sure.
Who else has some questions? Let's see who else is in the
I
house.
don't have a question. I just wanted to say something.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say something about Indigo, because Terry said something about not necessarily being the best mom because she took her daughter out of school and then took her to New Bethesda. But I live next door to Terry, and I spent a lot of time with her and with Indigo. And in fact, on the weekend, I sat and helped Indigo with this homework project that she has been struggling with. And the two of us spent an hour and a half talking about this really high level essay topic that she has to talk about, how people move to the dark side, and it's linked to Macbeth. And not only spending time with her on the weekend around her homework, but just generally spending time. I don't think I've come across a 17-year-old who is so together, so smart, so comfortable in her own skin, so humble and kind and sweet and lovely. I spend a lot of time with, you know, teenagers her age that are not even close to the level that she's at. So you are an incredible mom, and all the traveling and all the experiences, as you said, have really schooled her to be such an incredible young woman. And I think the world's her oyster.
Thank you, Catherine. A very different view from my mother, of course.
I think it could only in this day and age, with where we're at, stand her in good stead. I mean, that adaptability, that being able to change, to have different perspectives, to see different cultures, to be in circumstances where it's not a given. I think it's just amazing. And here we are, how many years later, stuck in having been stuck in a lockdown. Coming out of it, but that sense of appreciation that's coming out of that now. So I think it's the best schooling, like Kat said, that you could have offered her.
Certainly, I think if you compare traveling or sitting in a classroom, absolutely, there's no comparison. And interesting, traveling with a child is very different. I traveled before by myself. Traveling with a child, as a woman and a child, you're very non-threatening. So people tend to welcome you in, families and strangers and women. So it was a very different experience and a much more connected experience, especially because we stayed with locals. And I always try to choose local families with kids. But traveling... And normally if you're traveling by yourself, you're staying in backpackers so you can connect with other travelers, and that leads to all sorts of different stories. But traveling like as a women group was very different and a beautiful experience because people just welcomed you in. I saw a question someone asked about the tattoos. No, they weren't real tattoos. Indigo did not have real tattoos. They were the transfer ones, or we do the henna wherever we went, but no, she didn't have real tattoos. She would like one, but that's another story.
Terry, could I ask again, you just mentioned it once more about staying with the locals, and this was obviously pre-Airbnb days, so how did you work all of that out? So
the internet gives you answers to everything, quite frankly, and I just love Google. But in every single country there is an organization. If it's through the church, our first one was through the Spanish language school. Actually, they had, and from that one we actually, that's when we learned the trick to stay with the locals. So every country we'd go to, we'd find the homestays or the stay with the local or around the universities, but everything you can find on the internet, and that was 7 years ago, and I'm sure even more now. And I think almost Airbnb kind of started from that idea of sharing a family, and then just got out of hand. But honestly, there's not a thing you can't find on the internet at all.
I also love what you say. You know, I've traveled a lot in my life and done a lot of backpacking, and sometimes for long periods of time, and traveling as a mother and a daughter. I mean, I often traveled by myself, but if I, you know, and I did go and stay at locals. But seeing a mom and a daughter would be completely, it would make me feel the safest.
Absolutely.
So it's such an interesting point that, yes, it's a whole different experience. There's a softness, and yet at the same time, like an opportunity for kind of a closer, more intimate connection with people.
Definitely, definitely. I think people spoke to us much more because it wasn't any kind of threatening situation, and also because we didn't really go out at night. So we used to really pack the days and come back exhausted, and then I would research and write and post to Facebook. But a different experience, if I was traveling by myself, I would definitely have been going out at night, jolling in wherever country I went. So completely different, and seeing the world through a child's eyes. You know, she was much more fascinated with the llama than with the condor. And I'm like, well, we spent 4 days traveling to see this bird, but you want to play with the llama because it's cute and fluffy, you know? Yeah.
Amazing. Anybody else? More questions? I mean, I can speak. I can keep on asking as I do.
I think it's...
Who else is in the house still? I think everybody's so enjoying it. It is one of these sort of Thursday nights in the kitchen. You'll see it's so chilled because people can go and like have their cup of tea and just stay on and listen, and the radio and the live radio still continues.
I'll ask another question because I'm into this, and now so if I do have this child and I do take her traveling in 10 years' time, when she said she burst out crying on Okapseweg, when something like that happens, and how do you stick to what it is that you really want to do? How did you know back then that it wouldn't be the ruin of your child?
It's an interesting question. So I guess I've always had a love for travel, and even in my 20 years in IT, if there was a job I worked in Hong Kong and in Sweden and in all sorts of, in Panama. So I think I was confident enough that travel grows you, that there was absolutely nothing that you can lose by traveling. And also in the beginning when Indigo was talking about her friends, and then I started showing her pictures every night of Machu Picchu. Well, that's why we started at Disney. That was kind of the bribe to get her going. You know, we'll spend a week at Disney World if you want. But very soon, and actually I've got some lovely videos of her grade 3 class would send us a video and we would send them a video back. So we had this whole interaction with grade 3 at Komiki Primary. For that half the year. That was absolutely amazing. She would send them something at Machu Picchu, and then they would do a lesson about it, and then they would send us a video back to ask questions. But you know, also 9 was a good age to travel because she made friends with kids everywhere. I think very different if I traveled when she was 17 now. But some days when we were having our walking days, we'd go and sit at the local park where there were kids, and within 5 minutes she would playing with all these kids. So we found kids everywhere around the world for her to play with, actually.
Nice question, Trace. Thanks for that. What was it like so there was that integration and adjustment coming back from your travels, and then you landed up going to New Bethesda. Then you're there for 4 years. And then you come back to Cape Town. What was that like then? Because, you know, it keeps on shifting and moving.
You know what, Elaine, I think as human beings, we are so adaptable. When I came back to Cape Town, it felt like I'd lived here my whole life. Do you know what I mean? You just get back into that rhythm. You know, I look at how we got used to having no electricity, and then we got used to having no water, and then we got used to lockdown. We just adapt all the time. So, and coming back to a city I'd lived in where I had friends in, it kind of almost felt like coming home, you know, but very soon you just get into a rhythm, and this is how you are. This is the kind of person you are in Cape Town as opposed to the kind of person I was in Easter Island, you know. So you just flex back into it, but it's not like a culture shock. The biggest culture shock was going to live in New Bethesda. That was even traveling wasn't such a big culture shock. Living in a village with 78 people, that was a learning curve, like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like Tracy said, the pace is so different. You know, having gone from New Bethesda to Cape Town, or from traveling to New Bethesda, it's a very different sort of, a little on the trot and then a slow amble. I see that Andre has a question.
Yeah, I've heard so many versions of the story, but one of my favorite versions is, I'd like Terry just to tell them how much clothing she took with her Disney experience with the clothing, and then her favorite pair of shoes on the trip.
Okay, so I had one skirt, one pair of longs, one pair of shorts, and everything was in pink and purple because that's my color scheme. And when we were in Disney, I had actually a skirt on from Big Blue. You know, where they've got the panels in the different colors, if anyone shops at Big Blue. But we were in the queue for the Harry Potter ride, which had just opened, and it took us like 2 hours. And an American lady told me how amazing she thought my outfit was. And then I explained to her that I only had 3 outfits for the whole year. And she was so blown away by this. She actually announced it to the entire row of people, who then spent the next 2 hours questioning us and looking at our clothes. And another thing that I found in America was that I could never buy anything. You know, if I go to Cavendish to buy a white shirt, Woolworths will have 2, and Foschini's will have 1, and Edgar's might have 3. You go to Walmart, and there are 497 white T-shirts, and I would just get paralyzed by choice. I could never buy anything. So, but anyway, and Andre, I don't know why you're forcing me to tell this part of the story, but I traveled around the world in a pair of purple Crocs. I had one pair of shoes for the entire year, and they were purple Crocs. So comfortable, and you could wash them in the shower, and they went with everything. But they got quite worn out that year, and when we came back, we went to spend a weekend with friends in Scarborough, and we went for the sunset walk like everyone does, and everyone leaves their shoes on the boardwalk. And when we came back, my purple Crocs were gone. Oh, no. Everybody else's shoes were there, but my purple Crocs that had been around the world were stolen. And I gifted whoever took them. I thought, well, I hope it brings you as much happiness as it brought me for that year. But yeah, so I survived a year with 3 outfits and 1 pair of shoes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Because you're right. We just don't need so much stuff.
But I think a lot of people have seen that in lockdown. I mean, my neighbor said to me the other day, she keeps looking at clothes and thinking, well, what's the point of buying them? Because I'm sitting at home in my tracksuit all day long, you know. So lockdown, I think, has had some good lessons for people. A different way of looking at things, yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think it's very important to look at what has been learned and what is possible, as opposed to to always going into sort of the victimization. Because when you're in a situation, the only thing you can do is sit in that situation. So the best thing, you know, possible is to kind of, well, what can we gain from it? So
absolutely,
yeah. But traveling is, I've always said, traveling is the best schooling that anybody can do. Oi, I'm just going to switch my phone off so that.
The only thing, Elaine, I would say around that is quite a few times at Machu Picchu, Galapagos, and Easter Island, we would see those tour groups come in, and they are so destructive and so blind as to where they are and so demanding, and they want everything to be like it is at home, the food and the water and the drink, but they just want to eat it in an exotic location. And that kind of travel is damaging. It damages the environment. They are so rude. They've got this group herd mentality, and that terrified me. When I saw a cruise ship, we were just like, get out in the opposite, cycle to the other end of the island, just get away from those demanding, insensitive. I was actually shocked at when I saw, and also because we were staying with locals, and you can see the impact. You know, on Machu Picchu, I've got photographs of the number of plastic bottles they collect in a day. Huge signs everywhere saying drink out of a reusable bottle, and people just dump this plastic. I mean, it has to go down in those terrifying buses and then go on the train. But there is a destructive part of travel.
Well, like you say, there are different ways of traveling, and I also did a lot of backpacking. So, and I know, I mean, I remember being in Greece with a friend of mine, and those big cruise ships would stop at the ports and come off, and so there's a different type of traveling. There's
travel and tourism, I think.
Yes, you know, where you're a traveler or a tourist. And I think those are the differences.
Definitely.
When you want to learn about the culture, and when you're open to, you aren't demanding, you want to learn about and integrate, as opposed to impose on another country, where you actually the visitor and should be respectful of where you're going to. So no,
but it's different when there's two of you in the local culture and there's 250 that arrive at once, because you know, in New Bethesda in December, we would have about 8,000 visitors in December to a population of 78. So I could feel it when I was living there. People would come spend the night on their way down to the coast, but want the dinner, want the this, want the that. And, you know, the town would run out of electricity and water, and everyone, all the locals were so frazzled trying to keep the tourists happy, because you've got to make hay while the sun shines, you know. When the money's coming in, you've got to be there, open 7 days a week, you know. So, yeah, and I guess that's also a way I travel, is I talk to people who travel, and I hang around with people who travel, and we swap stories, you know.
Which is so lovely. And when you came back, you had left the corporate world. Was it related to public speaking? And what led you to this public speaking? Was it because you had gone traveling and you wanted to share that story?
Actually, what happened wasn't such a nice story, but a friend of mine's brother committed suicide. And he used to eat in my restaurant in New Bethesda often. And I went up to Joburg for the funeral. And in the middle of the church service, they called me up to ask me to say something. And I was terrible. I was crying. I was upset. The family was upset. And I stood there and I thought, I am going to learn to do this properly, so that if ever I'm called on again to speak, I will be able to do it. And that kind of was my inspiration. And then, of course, I found Andre, which help things endlessly.
Fantastic.
So I'm working with Andre now, and we're training together, doing public speaking, professional public speaking, teenage public speaking, speech writing, interviewing, all sorts of stuff around. I mean, Andre is an amazing speaker. He's been speaking for 15 years or something, a long time. And interesting for me that I've been mentoring people in speaking now, and how much satisfaction I get when they do a good speech. And I'm like, wow, I never thought of it from that point of view. But
yeah, it's quite
really enjoying
being on the other side of it, watching and hearing.
Yeah, it's a great feeling when you've worked with someone and helped them, and then they do the speech that you think, well, that's amazing. Yeah.
And if I could just say to you, is that the joy that I get out of watching Terry speak is that I bet you that every single person here has a story.
Oh, I agree.
Terry's one. And one of the joys that I have as a speaking trainer is to actually help them find that story. that they're authentic, but then you're surprised at how real every single one of these stories are. So, I mean, I can just say, even in this room here today, there's one or two of our students. Poppy, who's here, is a black lady from Pretoria, and she is in the top 50 of Mrs. South Africa. And she tells some incredible stories about growing up in a patriarchal society. What is it like to be a black woman in South Africa? And her and I have had huge chuckles, because when she phoned me during lockdown and I said, I'm really down and depressed, she said, I thought all white people were always happy. You know, and it's like, it's amazing the experiences we've had. Young Jason, I don't know if young Jason is still here. He was here.
He was here earlier on, I saw, and I'm going to be chatting to him tomorrow because I'd love him to come on.
Jason is a young man who was given a life expectancy of 10. He has a cystic fibrosis. And for anybody who knows cystic fibrosis, the way he's described it to me, he says every day his lungs create a cup full of golden syrup. And he needs an hour and a half of physiotherapy to clear his lungs. And what he discovered is that he could actually do it himself if he exercised hard enough. And so he cycles and literally coughs out from the sheer force of the exercise, coughs out this cup full of golden syrup. And in the doing has become one of the world's most remarkable young men, because he has completed the Cape Epic. For a person who has a lung disease and can hardly breathe, he's in the top 1% of the Cape Argus. And he's got another story. You know, when you've been told, and they're still telling him that his life expectancy is 3 years, 5 years. And every time they tell him that, it's almost like a challenge to him. He just breaks it every single time. But again, I do believe that every single human being has a story. Terry obviously has more than one. Terry's got a few really scary stories. She could keep you busy until the end of the year. You could have one every Thursday night, and each one will be more dramatic than the next one.
Love that. I love that. Love that. Thank you, Andre. I couldn't agree with you more. This was the whole reason I started this. And like I said, it's not about being famous or having some incredible accolades. We all have stories, you know, and that's where it started, where I shared my story. And every few weeks, I, you know, touch base with everybody and do sort of an evening where I share, you know, another section or a couple of chapters from you know, my story. Next week, I'm actually going to be chatting again to everybody. And I just encourage everybody to just, you know, get courageous. Exactly what Terry's trip was all about. You know, it was her courage to just step away from the mundane and to what wasn't working, and see your life. You know, I remember being quite inspired in quite an interesting way, sort of a backwards way. I read a book of an author who's quite well known, and I'm not going to actually mention the name of the author. And she wrote one book that was fantastic, and you know, it received, it was well received. And her second book I was quite disappointed by, but I used it as company when I went traveling one year, and it was quite a challenging little trip, and we did a lot of backpacking, and it didn't always work, and there was some issues along the way. But I did a couple of things. I walked nonstop, and I used this book, and I read the book, and I wasn't enthralled by it. In fact, a friend of mine said to me, just make sure you have a book, take it with. I said, I'm not enjoying it. She said, take it with. So I took the book, and when things didn't work out with the people I was traveling with, I had the book, and it became my company. And I finished reading it, and it wasn't fantastic, but it was my company. And more than anything, I finished it and I thought, this lady just told her story. It's her story. She had the chutzpah to tell a story. At that point, she was well known. Besides that, I thought, well, we all have a story. And that's what I learned from her, is that we all have a story. I didn't even enjoy the book that much, but she told her life story. I found it was quite dry and dull, but that I remembered always, and I thought, we all have a story, and one day I'll tell a section of mine, you know. It helped. I did work in the film industry, so I painted movie sets for a living, so that was part of always hearing stories. And I mean, I see, as Terry tells her story, unfolding of scene after scene. So her pictures really came to life with her voice and sharing the nuggets that came through. So Terry, thank you for that. And I mean, you're doing coaching now. Share just with everybody who's still on it, how they can get hold of you and what you offer now for people, you know, as added ongoing inspiration.
So I'm working with Andre, and we are giving public speaking courses for people who just need to be able to speak better at work or at home or at church or wherever. We're also doing professional speaking courses for people who want to do it to make money. We're running teenage speaking courses. And that's one thing we really believe in. If you're a teenager and you can articulate and you've got a good voice, you will rise up the ranks. Andre, in fact, I didn't make it on, was it on Saturday? We worked with a guy who was doing his speech to be chosen as a prefect or head boy. And then we're also doing speech writing, structuring how to structure a speech and to write a speech. And then with Poppy, who was here and I see who's gone, we've been I've been coaching her on how to answer interview questions for Mrs. South Africa, and obviously Andre does. And interestingly, because we come from such a different perspective, and when we're training someone on speaking, Andre will give an evaluation from his 20 years of experience as a professional speaker, and I will give an evaluation, and they're both completely different, but they both add something to the speech. So yeah, and I'm doing a lot of Zoom hosting. I am running Zooms for corporates, for events. I did a 7-hour Zoom today for a sustainability workshop. But I've got Zooms booked for the next, I don't know, the next 3 months, almost every single day. And that was another reinvention during lockdown, because like Andre and our income went to zero overnight from the speaking thing. And because I came from an IT background and I've been using Zoom, and I just immersed myself in and learned it. And now I'm charging out to run Zooms for people and doing Zoom training. And interestingly enough, the other day, also with Andre, I trained 2 or 3 blind people on Zoom. And I was like, how does this even work, you know? So all these interesting experiences. But yes, a lot around the Zooming, the technical side of it, and a lot around speaking and coaching. So if anyone ever needs help or wants to come on one of our courses, hey, just give me a shout and we'll tell you what it's
Elaine,
about.
it's very much fits in with my abundance theory, because I've really reached the peak of my career. So this year I was solidly booked till the end of the year. And then one day I lost every single piece of work that I had. Literally at 5 o'clock, the last person canceled. And I sat there and I just looked at my wife and I said, I've got no idea. Within 9 days, Terry helped me run my first meeting, because I'm actually very old. So I can't push buttons and speak at the same time. So Terry pushes the buttons and I spoke. And then we did a couple of those. Last week, I said to Terry, please put all the recordings on a stick and send it to me. You know, we couldn't put a 64 gigabyte stick. It was too little. We've done something like 80 talks. With people as famous as Francois Pienaar, to probably 12 of the rugby captains, to coaching sessions, to presentations with people, speakers across the world. And that's in a time of zero. And I believe that there's just plenty. And I just think, but on the same hand, I look at Terry and she knows and I know that we have both worked our butts off. We've worked our butts off finding the work and making sure that it's super professional. But I believe that there's more than that for everybody out there. So you just go out there, put yourself out there, learn the things, learn the skills, and go. But I think all of us, there's enough for us. There's enough for all of us on this planet.
I totally agree with you, Andrea. I really do. I mean, I've had to be very adaptable in my various careers. So I was never working for a company or corporate, but as a freelancer my whole life. So, and but there's one thing that came up. One of my stories, which is for a different time, but I went through cancer, and it was a remarkable time for me, because what it taught me is there is abundance, but you've got to get involved. So, the involved part was I participated in my health. I didn't hand it over. So when things become, go south and there's challenges, get involved. Ask people how you can get involved. Here we're sitting, ask. And that's why for me, I'm just like, both of you guys, if you could send me, and Terry, please do. So you send me your contact details, and that's great. But can you send me a little WhatsApp that actually, like, what it is you and Andre do, talks, Zoom, blah, blah, blah. I put that together. I copy and paste. I put it on the WhatsApp. So this Conversations in the Kitchen, for those of you that are new to it, Bunty, I haven't seen you here. Tali, you know me, but you haven't been on before. Mela is new. And then Andre and Terry, you've invited people. Please give them my WhatsApp number, because and tell them to, if they would like to be part of the Conversations in the Kitchen. Every week I send out a WhatsApp and say, this is who's speaking, this is the Zoom. I do it on social media, but there's a nice personal element where you can get a WhatsApp. It's very immediate, and I find it's quite effective. And my whole thing is that it grows. So if you send the details tomorrow morning, this evening, I send them out tomorrow morning, and, we just help each other. That's how it keeps on going. Mela, would love to be part of it. Okay, so I'm going to quickly, for those of you that are on, who can help me here? Okay, Terry, you good at this, because now I'm multitasking. Please won't you in the chat write down my cell phone number? I can ask you, yes, so that people can be part of the group. I get a bit sort of lost.
Tell me your number.
083
Yep.
259 3086.
And can I just say your email? Do you want to put your email, or you just do WhatsApp?
No, just WhatsApp. And then Mela, you can just take my number and send me a WhatsApp, and you will be part of the Conversations in the Kitchen every week. Andre, I know we're Facebook friends now, and my WhatsApp number is available, and we can just exchange, ideas, and please pop on. I'd love you to maybe come and chat one day. I think that would be amazing.
Mela's also a great speaker, by the way, and she's from Durban. But we've been bullying her to come down in Cape Town and do some work here, so we might even see her down in Cape Town as well, I hope. So I hope that won't take you too long.
And could I say hello to Bunty and Louie, who've been hiding here the whole night. And in fact, one of my stories revolves around Bunty and Louie, and that is an amazing story. So one day, maybe next year, if you need a slot, you phone me, and I will tell you that beautiful story of them and us and me and you, Bethesda.
Oh, I'd love that. My plan is that this keeps on going every week, regardless, because there is enough to go around. And because how nice is it when we all get together, in a very easy, relaxed way. And I kind of feel like, why can't we do business in this way? As much as it's a couple of things, like we're socializing, we're hanging out. It isn't the dry, laborious webinar. But at the same time, we are meeting each other and can help each other support sort of whatever business ventures we might have going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
I just wanted to say thank you. I really loved it. Thank you so much, Terry and Lainey and Andre, so much. I really loved it. I've got a dash, but I just wanted to say thank you in person. It was really wonderful.
Thank you for listening. And Elaine, I'm hitting a wall here. I did a 7-hour Zoom today where I focused like hell. So I think if you don't mind, I might just head
absolutely understand. I absolutely, and I just a really, really big thank you so much. You've had a hectic day, I totally know, but I am thrilled that you came on. Everybody has just loved your story, and please know that there's a slot available for you anytime you want to come on and share more stories. So thank you, Terry.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for listening and for all the nice comments, and we'll see you on the cyber side.
Lovely.
Thanks,
Bye,
Catherine.
Terry.
Thanks, Bunty. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Poppy. Thanks, Mila. Thank you, Elaine. That was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
So pleased you joined. My absolute pleasure. Go and get a good night's rest.
I'm going to.
Let's see who's still here. So Tracy, I think, has gone. Claire, only a pleasure. Mela, I don't know if you're still here. So maybe one day I can convince you. Let's be in touch and you know, chat and share a story. It's so nice to meet people, you know. A lot of the time, sometimes I've had people from all over the world like pop on, so this just makes it such a nice place to meet up, easy place to meet up. I'm seeing some people that I think that my friend Eva is in St. Lucia. She's in St. Lucia today. Hello, Eva. Nice to see you again. Laura has the most beautiful profile picture, and she's going to be joining us one day. She's a singer-songwriter. Looking forward to chatting to you. Maybe we can even chat on the phone, Mela. That'll be divine. And Andre, maybe we can chat as well and come up with sharing some things here, you know. I'd love to hear your story and how you got started. We got little bits and pieces tonight, so I'm sure there's lots more to carry on with.
I think storytelling is such an interesting thing, and as a speaker, I speak about economics and politics, so don't be scared about that. But the reality is that all speaking seems to be changing and taking the form of storytelling. And it's something that I'm trying to teach all my speakers now, is that if you can't tell a story, it really doesn't make any sense. People don't want to listen to long technical explanations of everything. And so, yeah, so I love this kind of forum where people just sit down and tell stories. And you'll see the fastest growing organizations are all doing exactly this. They're networking, they're creating relationship, and they tell stories. And they tell stories that have value. So I love it.
I agree with you. You know, it's been 4 months where we've all gathered together, and I've been doing this. And I've had people from specialists to doctors to, and I can see, I know the moment they start injecting something personal, then everybody's attention. So, I mean, I quite love watching the gallery because I can see, you know, and because it makes it personalized. Then you can relate. You're not separate from this thing that they're doing that you can't do. So I think the minute you get, you know, you inject your humanity into it, people really want to know, you know.
Elaine, so many of the speakers I have get very frightened about sharing intimate details. And yet, and I've got a little throwaway tagline, and my tagline is vulnerability is your greatest strength.
Absolutely.
The second that you said that you had cancer, I'm a big guy. And the second you said that, I felt protective towards you. I was like, don't mess with Elaine, I'll look after her. You know, sort of, there's something instinctive in us that we don't share the negatives. It's not America's Got Talent where the saddest story wins. But the reality is all of us have been through stuff, and especially if we've been through stuff and we've come out the other side, and we're okay. And let me tell you what, I trained as an economist, but when I was at a talk today where they said 66% of South Africans never paid their bonds this month. And that's an horrific statistic. So half the people in this room are worried about money and things like that. All I can say to you is that you will be all right. Yeah. Just hang in.
Lovely message that people need to hear. Thank you. Absolutely.
Robin Banks was saying if we lived 1,000 years, we would all be saying, there's just another pandemic. We've been through them before. We all know one thing. pandemics end.
Yes.
And life carries on.
Yes.
And the reality is, because we live 100 years and we've never been through this before, we all think, oh, this is the end of the world. But it's not the end of the world. This is just another thing. And that's what I love about Terry's story. So the worst case scenario comes and you lose your house. Well, get off your butt and get another one.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the end of the world. You lost your job, find another one. It's not the end of the world. Life is much bigger and greater than this. So that's what I think the power is in Terry's story. I mean, Terry's story for me is so inspirational, but losing fear.
Yeah. A foundation of how we can live our life. We can all live our life. You know, those things of being courageous. When you're not happy, change. Make the changes you need to. And don't wait till you get some disease to change, because any disease that comes by is your body telling you need to change what's happening right now.
When you said the cancer thing, I said two things to you tonight. I said my business there's a theory of abundance and it's got a theory of action, because I believe you've got to work hard. But the third A, which I didn't say, and I thought to myself, is the one of attitude.
Yes.
And when you said you had the cancer, I could immediately see that you tackled it with guts. You tackled it with a mindset. And that for me is the most important thing.
You're right. I mean, I think that any disease, the whole, our health is determined. 50% of our health is determined by our attitude, without a shadow of a doubt. How you think, you know, what you think you bring towards you. Where you put your attention, you get your attention. So, I mean, and a friend of mine is in the house, Lisa's in the house, and I was chatting to her. We both work in film, or I worked in film, and she still works in film. But one of the greatest things that film taught me is, like, you don't have an option of giving up. You don't even consider it. You make a plan. That's how we kept working for 20 years. You make a plan. So this doesn't work, you make a new plan. And yeah, that certainly, that attitude helped me move forward. But we can all implement that. And that's what I want to try and encourage people to do in the gentlest, kindest way, using tools that work for them.
Elaine, I've loved it. I'm also going to go, but just to say thank you. It's been a wonderful way to spend an evening. So thank you. And I'll definitely be back to listen to more.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Andre. Take care, and we'll be in touch. Bye, Terry.
Working on my computer in the background. But,
you need to go and get a good night's sleep.
I am going to, because I'm
for too long.
Yeah, today was an interesting day, but thank you, Elaine. I appreciate it, and I loved it, and I love your people, and yeah, great thing you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining, Terry. We'll stay connected.
I'll WhatsApp you about the things that I'm doing with Andre and the things that I'm doing without Andre, and yeah.
Wonderful. And I'm going to pass that on to the group, to my Conversations the Kitchen group.
You know what has been amazing is working with people who were like me when I started speaking, nervous, and I couldn't speak. And over the course of those 8 weeks with Andre and I, and then doing one-on-one training, how their confidence blossoms when they can talk. It is unbelievable. They are changed people from the start of the course to the end of the course, just by finding your voice. And women need to find their voice. For me, I'm like, I will mentor all the women on the course. It's not that I dislike guys at all, but when women find their voice, they are extraordinary and they're beautiful. They really are. It's amazing.
I thank you so much for saying that out loud, because the freedom that you find when you can find your voice, when you can speak. I had no idea I could comfortably speak in front of people. And when I started teaching yoga, I had to stand up in front of people. I realized now it doesn't matter whether it's, 550 or 500. It's the same. People are people. But what a freeing, thing to find. It's been the most liberating thing.
I'll tell you what, Elaine, is sometimes people like on the training courses have come to me and said, oh, but your story is extraordinary. We don't have a story. But what I say to them, you know, like I look at Marco or Jason, their stories are amazing, but I can't relate to someone having this disease and being in a quadriplegic. But the one woman spoke about getting out of an abusive relationship, and those stories I can relate to. So your story doesn't have to be extraordinary. Your story can be a real everyday event. Your mother died, your father died, anything. And we'll relate probably more to that to Marco's stories is unbelievable. So everyone has got a story, and we will learn something from everyone. And and you know what a women are like? They think they're not good enough, they're not this enough, they're not that enough. But actually their stories are they're the nitty-gritty, the whole society together. And that's why I say when they start to find their voice and they tell their simple little story. One woman tells a story about going to boarding school. And immediately everyone in the room who went to boarding school, zoop, you relate and you connect. And that's the thing about finding your voice. I mean, I almost get passionate about wanting to teach people to speak because I can feel the difference it made in my life, and I can see the difference in women's lives when they start to speak. It's amazing. Absolutely. And also it's learning how to articulate and to tell a story and have an opening and a middle and an end. All that technical stuff you can learn, but in expressing yourself, you learn so much about yourself as well, which is always.
Absolutely. Because, you know, when people learn that they all have a story, what they're doing is they're acknowledging their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, when people say to me, I don't have a story, like you said, and I've also heard that, I don't have. Well, you have a story, you have a life. Of course you have a story. It's not finished, but you have a chapter. Find that chapter. What motivated, what drove, what encouraged, what stimulated, what got you curious. So I'm totally with you. I'm deeply passionate about it as well, because it's so exciting. There's always possibility, you know, then it's endless. I don't feel like anything has a limitation.
Absolutely. And often the everyday story, like when I was traveling, the everyday people sitting at the bar fascinated me way more than going to this big blah, 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 whatever. Just the people living their lives, ordinary lives are so interesting because we've all overcome something. We've all learned something. We've all had adversity. We've all lost something. We've all broken our hearts. I mean, we all have something that's happened that's changed us. And if you can learn to craft it so it's interesting, because people can also tell stories that are so boring. It might be the most extraordinary story, but actually can be so boring that you just clock out. So it is a skill, but it is a very worthwhile skill to learn and practice.
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'm going to love you and leave you.
So nice. We could chat forever. So nice to see you. We'll chat again. Go and get a good night's sleep, and I'll see you.
Do that. Lots of love.
Bye.